questions like, oh,
Can I get you to count to 10 for me?
Yeah?
Get you to count to 10.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
10 to 1.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Back to 10.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10. Okay.
is that green light on here?
No, it isn't.
It's not on.
Yeah, now they're on. Oh, move your hand. Yeah, they're on.
It's okay. Now, see, what I mean, Dr. Baldwin, is that when we go through this background education and experience thing, and we take that break, that first break, then you remind me, why do we, why is there such a